as you listen to this episode, I want to call special attention to where Miranda and I go with our discussion, because we're talking about what these personal values mean to us specifically, but we're also diving into how it applies to leadership, to how it all connects with our other core values. This is episode 10 of season 1, The Power of Purpose. I am Sam Henninger, the Courage Coach for Executives, and your host. Here, you can learn to make tough decisions through emotional intelligence and collaboration, to grow outside of your comfort zone through humble self-awareness, and to love your life by being truly honest with yourself and others. Subscribe and share with your friend. We release new episodes every Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Usefulness and loyalty. Mm-hmm. I value usefulness, you value loyalty. What does that mean to you?
Loyalty is standing by someone, not just because you have a loyalty to them, but because you believe in them. And you believe that they are going to be reliable now and in the future.
You believe in me?
I only tell you that all the time, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What more?
Loyalty, whenever you have true loyalty, you want to do what you can to help the person or entity that you are being loyal to succeed. Because whenever you have that loyalty, it's an extension of yourself. And this can be to another person. It could be to an entity, like a business. It could be to a value system. It doesn't have to be just one individual or being loyal to your job or whatever. It can be on any level. But if you really are loyal, then you're going to do things within your power to help the others succeed.
Tell me what that means specifically to you.
This is kind of the opposite of that. You see the false loyalty in shows and movies all the time, where you have someone who is only in a relationship for themselves. And they're only loyal to you or loyal to the other entity as long as it serves them. And as soon as something happens, then they back out, or they're a lot more sneaky and everything. It's not an honest relationship. But whenever you have an honest, trusting relationship, then if something negative happens, you don't automatically jump to the worst case scenario of, oh, well, they don't love me, or they don't care about me, or they're only in it for themselves, and like all of those negative like thoughts that you have or could have whenever something goes south. But otherwise, like whenever something unexpected or undesirable happens, you look for good intent. And you say, okay, well, what are they trying to do? What are they trying to just cause my life chaos and disorder and pain? Or are they trying to do their best?
In today's climate, I've heard a lot of people my age or around my age talk about how loyalty is dead.
Just sad.
Well, when you hear stories about what you just described, where a company keeps someone around only as long as they're useful and predictable, but it doesn't go the other way, what would you say? Is there room for loyalty in today's climate between companies and their employees?
Absolutely. But it's a two-way street.
Right.
If you're loyal to me, I can be loyal to you. And if one party is loyal, it will only last so far before it sours. And the other person becomes jaded and resentful and absolutely disloyal. And you have your idea of like blind loyalty where they just do whatever they're told, which sounds great, but you don't want that person in your company because they're not going to help your company go further. They're just going to be a pawn that does what they're told. They're not going to think for themselves, which in some instances might be fine. But I feel like in our current economic climate that we want to have employees who are forward thinking. They think for themselves. They can problem solve for themselves rather than just blindly doing exactly what it is that they're told. And if you have a company who invests in their employees, then their employees are that much more likely to invest back. And it's a reciprocal thing where you invest in me, I invest in you, and then you grow together.
Yeah. I'm more concerned about loyal employers.
Mm-hmm.
What does that look like to you? How would one detect a loyal employer?
So a loyal employer is someone that cares about employees in more than just their effect on the bottom line. They want their employees to be happy and not to be lazy and carefree and like not doing their job. They still need to do their job. They want to do what they can to provide a healthy, safe, and productive work environment. And that comes a lot down to culture. And the bigger the company is, the harder it can be to control culture, but it's still possible.
I think that's right. There are different cultures depending on the company. What I've seen and what tends to be pushed out on social media are organizational cultures that are rooted in someone who came out of an old school sales environment. Very bulldogish, pragmatic. It's either you can hang or get out kind of deal. Like you need to go have a hard conversation. You have 2 weeks to shape up or get out.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's not the employer's job to babysit. Like if the employee is not willing to put in the work and make an effort, then yeah, like there's a time and a place for that. But if you can see that they are actively like doing what they can and they're being as proactive as they can and doing their part in being loyal, then it's part of the employer's job to also be loyal back to them and say, okay, well, is this really the best fit for you? Do we have another position that would be a better fit? What interests you? What excites you? What is something that will motivate you to want to be at work? And not every company is going to have a perfect fit or even a decent fit for every employee. And that might be a good time to part ways. But if the company has the resources or the ability to say, okay, well, you don't really fit in this spot, so let's put you here because this follows more of your skill set. And if they have that ability, then that individual, that employee is going to feel that much more loyal to the company because the company says, we thought you would do good here. It's not a great fit, but we see your value. We see you're trying to provide that value back into the company, and we respect that. we want to have that drive in our company.
During a time of lots of layoffs, especially in tech right now, I'm hearing, how would you demonstrate loyalty when layoffs are just a reality?
I mean, it comes down to delivery. And this would depend on whatever company it is. But if a severance package is warranted or an option to offer, that's something great. Offering letters of recommendation, saying these are things that they were able to do really well. And like not generic letters of recommendation, like genuine letters of recommendation, where it's something that is going to help them find another position someplace else, rather than, yeah, they showed up to work on time and they did their thing. Like, give specific examples where this is a skill that they have and this is how they used it within our company. If them returning at a later date is an option, have a way for them to reapply if they so choose. It's all in the delivery, where if you just say, sorry guys, good luck, then that doesn't show that you care what happens to them. But when you're doing these other things, which may not be required, but are very much appreciated, then it shows that even though the unfortunate event of having to downsize happened, that's not something that they're excited or happy to do.
I think there's a lot to be said there about the difference between perks, severance, compensation, and thoughtfulness, actual consideration for the person. And the idea that I had of you just saying that you can demonstrate thoughtfulness by, as far as it's not like a performance issue and there's it's awkward and bad blood, whatever, making it a matter of course, of just culture, to have people be giving each other letters of recommendation and making sure that that relationship is crystallized in a way that can be public to others.
Right.
I've seen a lot of people on LinkedIn recently giving their posts of, hey, I got laid off looking for this kind of opportunity, and just comment after comment of people saying how great that person is. And that can be a great place to do it. Yeah. You can make it more formal and giving them a letter of recommendation. I think it just comes down to thoughtfulness and consideration. Yeah.
I like how you mentioned using LinkedIn, and again, that really depends on the industry you're in, but a lot of business industries do use LinkedIn heavily. And those endorsements are something that people look at. And it doesn't have to be only from management. And it doesn't even have to be from the CEO. In fact, in a large company, the CEO saying something may hold less weight than your direct superior, because they probably never even met you.
Sure.
Or met the lower employees. Like, unless you work directly with the CEO, that's not going to hold a lot of weight, because he may not have that direct experience.
Well, and I've recently sent out a number of requests for recommendations on LinkedIn, and one thing it has you do, which I appreciate, is define the relationship between you and the person giving the recommendation. Yeah. So it helps people see more clearly, like, how much proximity did these two people actually have?
Yeah. And that adds more weight. If you have close proximity with the CEO, great. That's a fabulous recommendation. If you don't, then it's just empty words.
Right.
Because that's all he can give or she can give. These recommendations can come from coworkers too. Yeah. Saying this is how they worked. Like, they were a great person to have on my team and to work with. and that sort of thing. So the loyalty from a company doesn't even have to come from management and superiors. It can come from coworkers too.
Yeah. I want to press you in a different way on the idea of loyalty, because what I've seen in many stories and in real life, I've come to the conclusion that loyalty is one of the more corruptible virtues, in the sense that you can have someone be very loyal, but to the wrong person. One of the only things that gangsters and villains demand of their followers is absolute loyalty. That's the only virtue they care about, and it's twisted to their evil ends.
Yeah.
So tell me more about what loyalty means to you and how you make sure you're being loyal in the right direction.
Well, and I would comment with the villains and the gangsters and like the bad guy. Our son's really into the bad guys.
He likes being bad guys a lot. Yeah.
But that loyalty they're demanding, there's also some level of reciprocity there, because their followers, if they're not getting something in return, they're going to stop following. That might be that their family is safe for the night, or like that some misdeed that they did is covered up, or whatever. Like there's something that they're getting in return, some level of loyalty. Otherwise, no one will stay, and they'd be on the team to get rid of them. But trying to ensure that you're aligning with the right people and entities, looking at their values before you hitch your wagon to theirs is a good thing. Saying, okay, well, what do they stand for? What is important to them? And why would I want to join? If it's somebody that you've already hitched your wagon to and you're finding out later, it's like, maybe this isn't the best fit. Like, look at what they're repeatedly doing. How are they showing loyalty back to you? Is it threats of like, oh, well, I'll help you cover this up, but if you don't do what I say, adios.
Yeah.
Or is it genuine loyalty where they actually care about you and want you to succeed as well?
I think that's a really interesting point, that people you don't want to be loyal to will lead with reciprocity. They will often lead with the things you would look for in establishing a bond, but they end up using it in the wrong way.
Yeah, and they may even be very generous in the beginning. Those who are untrustworthy and ones that you wouldn't want to be loyal to, they, like a corrupted company or corrupted individual, the bad guy sort of thing, they may lead with being overly generous. Very great compensation package, overly generous with gifts, just being overly grand. And then whenever they need something from you, they're like, well, I got you those clothes, or I got you the corner office. And they use that as leverage to then get you to do something that you wouldn't necessarily do on your own.
And I would add a layer to that. You say it as someone who goes in expecting to behave that way and like blackmail and leverage that generosity against someone else. But I think what happens maybe even more often is people are generous. They do try to put their best foot forward. And then because of a lack of understanding, a lack of connection or gratitude, they end up feeling like when they do get asked to give more, they feel like they're being taken advantage of. And they end up in that attitude of, but I already gave you all this. So it can happen any which way.
Yeah. there's multiple levels.
Yeah.
I mean, I was going the very dark level,
Right.
because
the extreme.
You talked about the bad guys and the gangsters.
Right.
Like that's the absolute worst.
Yeah. But even between two well-meaning parties, if it's not communicated clearly and gratitude isn't there, you can both end up in that direction.
Right. Where it's an eye for an eye, even if it's a positive eye for an eye.
Right.
I give, you give sort of thing, rather than just giving to support the other.
Right. So like, how do you personally, we're talking in abstract, we're talking about company cultures and things like that, business world, but how do you personally straddle that line between being generous, loyal, trusting in that way, and knowing where the line is?
I mean, whenever I look at a relationship, the ones that I'm most loyal to obviously are my family, because those are the people that I surround myself with. Those are the people that I have the longest longevity of relationships with. And when I see someone that I care about being hurt, like that loyalty kicks in. Of like, okay, well, this is not something that I stand for, and I do what's within my power to protect them. And I think especially in those family relationships, if you have individuals that are taking advantage of that loyalty, then they'll see, oh, well, if I'm ever in trouble, they'll come running. And it can be a fine line to say, okay, well, are they taking advantage of me and not returning that loyalty back? Or is there something bigger going on? And I think whenever you're looking at these relationships, it's important to say, or not saying eye for an eye, but if I am in need of help, are they there? Or am I always the one going to help? And if you're always the one helping, but never receiving any assistance, then that's not a true symbiotic relationship, and their loyalty isn't there.
2 points. The first being just on that comment there, the book boundaries, which we have.
It's a great one.
We're going to dive into that in the future. But to touch on it now, along with another famous psychology book, Influence, by Robert Cialdini, one of the things we know about human behavior is the law of reciprocity. People hear about that. It gets bandied about every which way. But one of the things that always stood out to me when I learned about the law of reciprocity is that if someone is generous, but then the other person is denied the opportunity to reciprocate, like you are generous and you say, no, I don't need anything. And you like really insistently say, no, don't do anything back. It actually creates more negative attitudes toward the person because you didn't let them reciprocate. And so when you say, in a different way, when you find yourself being the one that's always helping and never getting the help back, that is a real thing, and that happens to people. But a different angle to that is being the person that doesn't know how to ask for help or doesn't know how to accept help. And that can really hinder loyalty and closeness in relationships. Well,
because you're not allowing if you can't accept help or ask for help, you're not allowing someone else to be loyal back. And eventually the other person is going to feel either like a dead weight or like not feel that loyalty that they want to express because they haven't been allowed to. I mean, it's a muscle. The more you use that loyalty muscle towards an individual or towards an entity, the more loyal you're going to feel. But the less you use it, the less loyalty you're going to feel.
another point I wanted to ask you about. How do we move beyond or above that transactional attitude in a relationship, especially in, let's say, the workplace, in the job market? How do we move beyond this transactional attitude towards we're not keeping count? It's not eye for an eye, like you're saying.
Well, and it has to be a perspective shift from what can you do for me and what can I do for you? It's just a how can I help sort of attitude of how can I help this person meet this goal? How can I help this employee reach our sales goal? And like, what resources do they need? Do they need better technology? Do they need better hardware? Do they need better resources to find the potential clients? Like, what do they need to reach that goal? And how can I help with that? And sometimes there's not anything we can do. And we just say, hey, I know it's tough. We got to figure it out though. But other times, like, that better technology is there and it's within budget and it's what is needed, and making sure like the needs are met. And as an employee to an employer, it's like, okay, well, how can I help reach this sales goal? What more can I do? Do I need to make sure that I have music off? Do I need to make sure that I have my desk organized so that I know where my things are when I need them, so that I know where my files are located? Do I need to make sure to keep my computer desktop clear and organized so that when a file is needed by a customer or by one of my superiors, I can get that to them quickly and I don't have to be like, oh, where did I save that? Like, there's different things of like, okay, what can I do to help? What is my contribution? Rather than, what are you going to do for me?
One last point I wanted to touch on, thinking again about the business environment, organizational environment. I see loyalty as being a value that is all about priorities. When things are going well, there's not much need for loyalty because everyone's getting more than enough.
Right.
It's a reality that the top priority will always be the survival of the organization.
Right.
So when it comes down to it, the organization is going to have to evolve, shift, restructure, whatever it needs to do to stay alive.
Right.
And avoid bankruptcy, closing, all that. What's the minimum viable demonstration of loyalty that someone can always show, no matter how thin things get? Right.
I think just showing up, sometimes that's all you can do, is just being present and continuing to look for how can I help? Because times get tough. And whenever times get tough, you rely on past experience and say, okay, times are tough. These are things they've done in the past to show I'm important. And even though it may not be on the same scale as before, they're still showing me in whatever ways they can that I'm important and that I'm able to contribute. Whether that is a financial tightening of the company and saying, well, okay, we got to tighten up. Maybe we need to renegotiate some contracts and say, we don't want to have to lose as many employees. Can we renegotiate some contracts for a limited time and say, this time period, we're going to set a new date to renegotiate a contract. And if we reach these goals, this is what's going to happen. And then that way, everyone is saying, okay, well, we're all going to cut back. And this is how we're going to move forward. Whether that is taking off a event that was planned, and or making the event not as grand, or doing something else that, like, taking away some perks that are in the office that is really nice but not necessary. And then saying, whenever we get past this hurdle, then we can renegotiate and bring these things back. Or maybe you find that you actually didn't use it or want it in the long run. Like, I know a lot of companies like offer free soda.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, that can be a nominal expense, but if you have thousands of employees, that can add up.
Sure.
And like, maybe saying, okay, well, we're tightening up our budget, so we're going to take away this for a while. We'll reevaluate in 3 months and see, did you guys miss it? How do you feel? Do you feel better without having soda pumping through your veins 24/7? And so there's different things that can happen, but the important thing is communication. Rather than just taking something away and people be like, what happened to the soda fountain? And no one's saying anything. But having that communication, saying, we need to look at our budget. We're making budget cuts. We're going to be taking away some things that have already been provided in the past, but this is the plan going forward.
Going along with that, I think relating it back to the point of this whole experiment that we're doing on courage, I think it takes a lot of courage for leaders in any organization to openly communicate, like you're saying. But I think ideally they would be able to communicate that they are taking on more sacrifices than other people because they're the leader.
Yeah.
In that sense, I've seen a lot of examples where, sure, it's easy to look at the senior people at Wall Street and these large companies, CEOs getting big fat bonuses while there's layoffs and things like that. And so it's inverted where the people at the top are benefiting more by people at the bottom sacrificing the most, which is like their job or just getting an even worse working environment. I would see the optimal path forward is, if you're serious about being a leader, is to demonstrate that you are giving up more to make it through whatever challenge you're going through than people below you.
And that will enact loyalty from the people when they see that you're in it with them, rather than just handing out whatever poor consequences of a business doing bad is happening. If they see, okay, well, I'm not the only one suffering, I'm not the only one cutting back, and they're not just getting crazy bonuses whenever things are bad. Like, that's going to bind people together and create that strong loyalty where they know that the leaders aren't in it just for themselves.
And to round out this thought, I have experienced many leaders who value modesty. They value just quietly doing what they need to make sure all the mouths get fed, and they take on that responsibility and they lose sleep over it, honestly. But it's something they take very seriously. But without the communication, there's a balance here, right? Because we don't want it to look like, oh, woe was me, like looking like a martyr. That's what many people, that's why they're not communicating it, because they feel like that's how they would come off. But there needs to be something to communicate. You don't have to belabor it, bemoan your situation. But I do think it's really important for a leader to show, this is what we're asking of you. This is what it is. This affects me even more. Like, I think it has to be a bigger sacrifice than most for it to inspire loyalty. Because if it was, like we're saying, if it was taking away soda, which I'm not sure how much that would really affect the bottom line in the grand scheme of things, there's probably bigger
Right.
things to take care of first. But if the soda machines get taken away, but everyone knows that the people closer to the top are much more health conscious, so they aren't drinking the soda in the first place.
Right.
It doesn't actually affect them. It's not actually a sacrifice. So making sure that they understand you are committed, you are willing to take an outsized drawback, an outsized sacrifice, because you are getting outsized benefits comparatively. That to me is loyalty just becomes instinctive.
Well, and you think about on a battlefield. There's countless stories of various different sorts of leaders where you have the leader who sends his army out in front of him. And it's like, you go and you fight, and I'll be back here. And then you have some leaders who are like in the middle, where they're amongst the people, but they're not like at the front lines. And then you have the leaders at the front lines. And you think about that, like, which leader inspires the most loyalty? It's the one that's out front, because he's risking his neck along with all those other guys that are right there at the front lines. And he's that much more important to protect.
That's what I was going to say. It's such a visual metaphor. You think if an army who was loyal to their commander saw the commander going and putting himself in harm's way to
protect them.
To obtain the objective, whatever that is, to complete the mission, to end the war, whatever. Yeah, you'd think just how urgently they'd be like, oh, crap, I got to go do what I can.
Yeah. Well, and then that enacts the how can I help?
Yeah.
And you lose focus of, well, what is it that I need? It's like, well, I need, like, yeah, you take care of your needs. Like, you make sure you have your shield and your armor and your sword. Or, I mean, I'm obviously thinking of like old time fighting.
This is an expanded metaphor.
But like, you do what you need to do to take care of yourself, because when you're taking care of yourself, you can take care of others. Another metaphor is you put your mask on, your oxygen mask on first on the airplane.
On the airplane, right.
When you have those immediate needs to be able to do your role, then you can take care of the people around you and bind together in loyalty. And that's when loyalty is strongest.
I love that. How can I support you more in living out loyalty?
Yeah. And being able to better live out loyalty, there's that reciprocity that happens where the more loyalty someone gives, then the more is received. And that can go along with anything. And that could be with whenever a decision is made that we make together, that we remain loyal to that decision rather than going back to old habits. And if we fall back, like making that effort again to get back on track of whatever that decision is.
Okay. I think this is important to note because this is relevant to any two people, any two parties that want to develop loyalty between each other. We perceive each other's actions and intentions differently and way of receiving information and making decisions.
Absolutely.
So when we make a decision together, like not going back on it or just recommitting to it when something else happens, I want to communicate that often the way you process information and making decisions is not the way I do it. So I'm going to commit to being open to the way you make decisions. And that looks like needing to talk out loud, needing to ask others' opinions, needing to deliberate, mull things over, sometimes ask the same question multiple times before finalizing the decision.
Right.
Which for me, it's virtually the opposite in every way. I do everything internally. Once I decide, it's decided. No going back. Any further discussion is frustrating. But there's a lot we can learn from your way of doing things because new information comes along. it's important to reevaluate at times. So to add to everything you just said, I'm also committing to what's real between us two, is that I need to be open to the way you think things through.
Thank you.
That's really real.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So usefulness.
Mm-hmm.
That one's interesting.
Why do you think it's interesting?
Well, I mean, of course, like, everyone would want, like, things around them to be useful. And I just find that interesting that, like, that is one of your top ones.
When I was talking with one of my coaching colleagues, she had mentioned, because as a reminder, this whole series, this whole exercise is inspired by a exercise that Brene Brown does in her Dare to Lead thing. I haven't been through it. I haven't read any of her books yet. I should, because it turns out that so many of the things I'm interested in, she's already talked about at length. But my friend reminded me, or explained to me, that the way we talk about the rank ordering of values, the further down we go, the easier it is to exchange, to swap those values out. They can be more aspirational, more situational to what you're going through at the time.
Right.
The further up you go, the 1, 2, 3, that's going to be the constants. And that's what you need to focus on. I think it's important to talk about top 10 because it gives you a much clearer picture. And it gives you space to talk about those things that are situational to you right now, or aspirational. When I decided that usefulness was a core value for me right now, maybe it is situational. Maybe it will be swapped out for something a year or two from now. But it definitely is aspirational because over the years, I've always been motivated to help others. I have a rich inner life where I develop lots of connections between different ideas, different experiences that help me see things more clearly and help me make decisions more effectively. Being able to articulate that in a way that other people will understand has not always been very easy for me. Being able to use simple, concrete language instead of expanding the metaphor and diving into the richness of how all the different ways that this particular framework or line of thought could be applied, it falls flat. It falls on deaf ears for a lot of people who are more concrete, more pragmatic. And so for me, usefulness is an important value because as someone building a brand, building a business, a service, people have to know what it is you're doing. They have to, they have to understand, and it has to be of use to them.
Right.
So that to me has been of particular interest and necessity over the last couple of years.
Well, I find it interesting that usefulness and loyalty are very closely tied, where the more useful something or someone is, the more loyal you are to that thing or person, because there's something to be loyal to.
There's this age-old idea when it comes to art, when it comes to invention, generally, the tension between form and function. So form being the aesthetic. Right. Is it beautiful? And function being, does it work?
Does it do what it's intended to do?
Yeah. It's always a great topic to get an understanding of someone's ideas around life, how pragmatic they are, how drawn to the aesthetic they are, because you get an idea of what matters most to them. Between form and function, which matters most. Right. And for a lot of people, especially food Instagram pages usually comes down to form. Right? Usually comes down to how does it look? The beauty of it is the thing that's of value. For a lot of other people, I don't care how it looks. I don't need a roll of duct tape to be beautiful. I need it to work.
Right. Well, and I think it comes down to what the purpose is. Like, you look at those Instagram videos of the food and everything, people aren't eating that food. I mean, the vast majority of the people who are consuming that content aren't going to be eating that food. They're looking at it and they're imagining eating it. So it doesn't really matter what it tastes like. It just matters what it looks like. And you think of all of these food advertisements and you see the behind the scenes where they like add smoke for steam, or they do different things to the food, and usually the food is cold and unappetizing. Right. Like there's just things that aren't the real deal with it. That's why the picture of the Big Mac burger is completely different than the actual Big Mac.
I was just gonna say, yeah, the real like fast food advertisement photos, it's not even real at all. It's like plastic. Yeah, it's literally plastic.
And so, but the purpose is completely different. Like in those advertisements, no one's intended to eat that food. They're intended to look at it. It's intended to look appetizing rather than be appetizing. And then you have on the other hand of like duct tape, where you don't really need duct tape to look pretty. You need it to hold something together. And it depends on the purpose of whatever it is, on how useful it is.
Yeah, I mean, there are plenty of patterned duct tape rolls that people can buy, and they do buy them, and they sell them because people buy them.
Yep.
So, right. This is a whole way of seeing the world and communicating what matters most to people. I think you're right. Usually part of the form is informed by its function, and part of the function is informed by the form. And
they're reliant on one another.
Yeah. That said, I have experienced personally that while I am drawn to the aesthetic, I don't count myself as a visual design kind of person, but I am much more of a musician, much more of a performer in that way. And so I am obviously drawn very much to the aesthetic. That said, I've spent all of my adult years so far learning where does the rubber meet the road between the beauty of life and potential and how people can grow. I mean, I'm a coach. That's the most potent form of fulfillment comes from helping people be better in my eyes. But unless someone understands what you do, how you do it, why that works, I mean, they don't have to understand why it works. Although I am interested in theory and all that. I do enjoy that. But
they need to believe that it does.
Yes. Unless they believe it works, unless it's communicated to them in a way they can grasp, then it's not useful. And you can't feed a family on that.
Right.
So to me, being able to bridge that gap between form and function has been of particular interest to me. And it comes down to getting feedback,
right? Which
has not always been the simplest thing for me to do. When there is someone that's willing to explain to me, like, do this a little bit better, try this different thing out, it comes down to just experimenting, but then also being aware of who's giving the advice and why.
Right.
Because often people give advice on how they would do it, which could work. Like they could just be flat out right and do this thing better. But often it comes down to personality and where their strengths are. And if they have strengths where you have weaknesses, you trying to just do things their way is not going to equate to usefulness.
Yeah.
Because you're going to be fighting an uphill battle the whole way.
Mm-hmm.
And you're going to be exhausted and get a fraction of the results. So usefulness to me is related not just to making sure that people clearly and simply understand what I do and why, but also understanding myself and how I show up best and how I show up as the most useful and accepting that and accepting where I don't.
So how does usefulness relate in the workforce?
I've seen an overwhelming attitude, especially among young people, young professionals, just bust your butt. Just work as hard as you possibly can and stack your cash and find a better opportunity. That could just very well be a phase of life. What discourages me to see is people in the mid to late career that not only have kept that same attitude, but push it on others and create a culture around, we just work hard. Because that alone doesn't itself equate to being useful.
Right.
You can be working super hard in precisely the wrong direction to serve your customer, to serve whatever stakeholder is in question.
Right.
So for me, usefulness is nested within purpose. And this is why it shows up so low for me, is that everything else, it has to be filtered through first.
Right.
And that's, again, one of the powers of this conversation, this exercise that we're doing, that we want to communicate, is that it's a filtering process. That I'm not going to be useful at the expense of
something else,
of a higher value. And you can see that for yourself. And that's sort of the question you need to be asking yourself when you're rank ordering your values. But being useful in the workforce, I think, does mean that. It does mean both working as hard as you can insofar as you understand your purpose.
Right.
I don't think it's necessary to be thinking about your purpose all the time necessarily, because that can distract you from doing the work. But there's a balance that needs to be struck. There needs to be a regular interval where you check in individually, as a team, as a leader. Are we still going in the right direction?
Yeah.
And that can be led by metrics and OKRs and all sorts of whatever you want to say. And that's good and tangible and real. But there's also the emotional, the spiritual, the psychological side of making sure that you can maintain yourself.
Yeah. I completely agree with being able to have that spectrum. So within the workforce, is there a way to guard against one's usefulness being taken advantage of?
Speaking as one who has usefulness as one of his top 10 core values, but has placed it at number 9. Speaking as someone who would place it or some similar value much higher than I would say it is important to work hard. It's important to be aware of how others receive that. Because while many people would see that as just an altogether virtuous thing, like there's no such thing as working too hard. There's no such thing as showing the boss that you're too committed to the project. There are limits still. I've had the experience of working basically every hour I had, even hours I didn't have, in the sense that I was regularly sleep depriving myself, going to school, working graves, working swing shifts, weekends, weekdays, everything, while going to school and dating you from living 2 hours away. So I know what it's like to revel in the idea of being useful to others, of having that to to put your hat on.
Mm-hmm.
But to make sure that you don't get taken advantage of, I think it starts with you.
Mm-hmm.
It starts with you not assuming
that you're the only one that can.
Exactly. When you have boundaries within yourself, I have a bunch of stamina, I have a bunch of energy and passion and desire to show others that I work hard, but I do have a limit. Mm-hmm. I do have a responsibility to myself to make sure that I can maintain that energy.
Right.
And that often means taking time off.
Mm-hmm. Making
sure that my off hours are focused on keeping my cup filled, so to speak.
Mm-hmm.
And that inner sense of integrity, I mean, you're asking me. Because, So integrity is important to me. Courage is important to me. It takes courage to admit I can't just work forever all out.
Right.
It takes courage to admit, for young guys especially, I don't think I want to be Elon Musk. I don't want to work 120-hour weeks.
Yeah.
Managing 6 companies, that kind of just all out barbarian of a worker.
Right.
I can have a better all-around life without having to work my fingers to the bone.
Mm-hmm.
Once you have that courage to admit it, the integrity to honor it, that I do need to take time off, to take time away from working,
mm-hmm.
then that demonstrates to others, okay, he's not just some machine mm-hmm. that will do whatever I tell him to do because he thrives off of being valued for his hardworking attitude.
Mm-hmm.
So that to me is a deeper understanding of usefulness, because there's longevity to it as well. Mm-hmm. You avoid burnout, you avoid breakdown, because you're actually maintaining the machine that mm-hmm. is you over the long term.
Right. I really like that. Like being able to strike that balance between taking care of yourself, but also remaining useful to your job or cause.
Mm-hmm. So that combined with regular check-ins on mm-hmm. what is fueling my purpose, because you might have this dream of mm-hmm. this is why I'm doing it. And for so many of us dads, it's I want to make sure college is paid for or something like that, or maybe we're led by guilt by having mm-hmm. to spend time away, mm-hmm. that I want to be able to afford a special vacation mm-hmm. to try to make up for that. And that's just a reality. Some people, that's just what you have to do. That's what work demands. But usefulness is tied to clear communication, mm-hmm. working as hard as you can, in as far as it is nested within a regularly developed and acknowledged purpose that you have, and then all that within the courage and integrity to know what you're actually capable of over the long term mm-hmm. and what you need to do to maintain it.
I think it's really funny that that summation of that is essentially how you allow others to build trust in you.
Well,
and also build trust in yourself.
Right. And I think it's easier to have come to that conclusion because we've had all these discussions mm-hmm. prior. And again, dear listener, this is the kind of breakthrough and the kind of maturation and fulfillment that you can feel when you're having these kinds of conversations mm-hmm. with your spouse or someone else that you trust, mm-hmm. that you're in it with. Because you're not going to get to this clear understanding of how this all ties together without hashing it out mm-hmm. for a bit.
Well, and I would also add that you can even do this with a coach, where mm-hmm. you're not necessarily talking about like your values, my values, but you can walk through like, okay, well, why is this value important to you? What does it mean to you? How does it flow? And you can still get that same, like a very similar benefit without having someone that you're in it shoulder to shoulder with.
Yeah. And to contrast what we're talking about here with what's more common in the workplace, when you see that company mission statement, like the bullet points of what we believe in and what we're going to do and how we're going to serve the customer and all that, the reason why that hardly ever works, except for maybe the people who drafted the document, I think there's power in actually drafting the mission statement yourself.
Yeah.
That's really about as far an influence such a thing can have, except when you talk it through. You develop the logic. Where's the flow? Where's the connection between me and what's being said? And this is really part and parcel with a personal mission statement.
Yeah.
Because being able to talk through, make the connections, dive deep on what each of these words, which on paper don't mean anything really. Like they all have their dictionary definitions, but developing your personal definition of each of these values is what matters most, because that's going to actually give you energy to do what you need to make necessary changes to be better.
With usefulness, how can I better help you with that?
Well, like I ended up coming to the conclusion of, there's actually lots of layers to how I view usefulness. It's not just about working hard, but sometimes it is about just working hard. When you have the purpose, when you have the boundaries, then it just comes down to
getting it done.
Doing it.
Yeah.
Again, being real, getting practical, working from home, I need more hours to get my work done, more support with, you know what? I think we really do need to switch out that doorknob for one that locks so that I don't keep getting barged in on. That would really help me with being more useful.
Okay.
So will you buy me a doorknob?
I can buy you a doorknob.
Okay. Cool. I'm Sam, the Courage Coach for Executives.
And I'm his wife, Miranda.
And remember, it starts with you. Studies have shown that your brain's ability to successfully convert new information into knowledge that sticks with you can be multiplied 10 to 20 times when a session of learning is concluded with reflection. If you're able, please join me for a few minutes of personal integration. I will close my eyes, inhale through my nose, and exhale through my mouth. I'm thinking of the impressions I received during this episode, connecting new ideas to facts and experiences I already have, and then allowing myself to focus back to the present moment. I'm grateful to have spent this time with you. The music will play us out. Thank you for joining in the journey.